is the story behind an entry in the 1972 Formula One record book that is meaningless to all but the most dedicated motorsports anorak. My cousin Peter Connew had no interest in motor racing until at 24 he quit his job designing record players to attend the 1969 Italian Grand Prix. In 1970 Peter found work with John Surtees, but unknown to anyone, soon after joining he began to design his own Formula One car in his bedroom at home. I was a Formula One fan from the cradle and a woodwork teacher. One day in 1971, out of the blue, Peter showed me a chassis that he built at his friend John Gargin's house and invited me to join his team with carpenter Roger Doran, Ron Olive and Roger's father, Daddy D, would also join us. Working from a lock-up in Chadwell Heath, I was to make a model to show our potential sponsors and then to mould the fiberglass bodywork. I took a temporary job in wholesale funeral supply, where I had access to a telephone. Peter worked for an engineering firm, which allowed him and his mates at work to make valuable components during their lunch hours. Borrowing a dummy engine, gearbox and wheels, we finished the car late one night and then pushed it down the road onto the forecourt of a local garage to take a photo. Yardley of London was so impressed with our photos, model and Peter's approach, they called Phil Kerr at McLaren to ask him to assist us. Vincent Morset of Darnval Cars and a consortium backing Francois Migaud came to see us in the spring of 1972. A 5-race deal for Francois to drive our car was sealed when Peter collected a substantial wad of French francs from Frédéric Lécher in Paris. We became a full-time team in April, but Ron Olive left following a dispute over non-union practices. Roger's friend Steve Bertrand helped out occasionally. Before the French Grand Prix, Peter obtained a working engine from Phil Kerr at McLaren, while Francois borrowed a truck from his brother and helped prepare it as our transporter. On June 24th, I got married and returned to our lock-up the next day. I did not go home again until July 7th. Francois and Peter went ahead to France, and we followed in the truck with a driver called Mansell, but not that one. We arrived at Le Mans on the end of a tow rope after the engine in the truck blew up. While the truck was repaired, we tested the car, only to find the rear suspension had been damaged in transit. Missing the French Grand Prix, we repaired the suspension. Then Francois' friend, Roger Schweitzer, drove us back to England. Francois qualified for the British Grand Prix on his third flying lap, but our first race ended in Chadwell Heath, with a police escort waiting to take us back to Brands Hatch. A couple of all-nighters proved insufficient to repair the suspension, which had collapsed again. The German Grand Prix at the Nürburgring was nearly our second race. We hadn't officially entered, and the organisers eventually said, "Nein, go away." 25 of the 26 cars present were allowed to start the Austrian Grand Prix. Fortunately for us, Henri Pescarolo had irreparably damaged his faster Williams March, so Francois in the Connew was allowed to start in last place. Between practice sessions, Alistair Caldwell kindly let me use the McLaren lathe. Not far from where I was working, McLaren drivers Denny Hulme and Peter Revson were chatting. I could hardly hold my vernier. On the afternoon of the race, I was excited. Peter, whose first design for Surtees started the 1970 British Grand Prix, remained calm. Francois, in 19th place, was going strong, and we earned £40 for completing quarter distance of the race. However, coming onto the pit straight for the 22nd time, Francois brought an out-of-control Connew safely to rest. As he got out of the car, Francois was beaming. He said the car was great. After Emerson Fittipaldi won the race, we found a split suspension plate had allowed a rear wheel to steer. As we loaded up to go, a lad told us that only Jackie Stewart's Tyrrell was quicker than Francois through a corner where he had timed all the cars. On our way home and running low on diesel, Roger pulled up in a small French town after dark and disappeared until morning, leaving us to sleep in the truck. That night, Peter Connew probably became the first man to sleep inside a Grand Prix car bearing his own name. On the August bank holiday weekend, we entered the Rothmans 50,000 at Brands Hatch. The race was open to any car, and we were in with a chance to win enough cash to get us to Monza. During first practice, a steel shaft broke inside our engine. Back at our lock-up, Peter and Roger stripped the engine, while Francois attempted to take me in his ancient BMW to Cosworth of Northampton to collect a new shaft. When Francois started pumping the brakes and using the handbrake to slow down, I demanded that he stop. The brake fluid was boiling. "It does that," he said, as we slowly drove back to Chapel Heath. Using a van lent to us by Ford Competitions manager Stuart Turner, I collected the part alone. Continuing practice the next day, Francois came past the pits with smoke pouring from the engine. Thanks to a circuit failure and the subsequent piston damage, we did not go to Monza, and sadly this was the end of our deal with Francois. In return for a respray and engine rebuild, paid for by Lec Refrigeration owner Charlie Purley, Peter agreed to enter the car for Charlie's son David in the John Player Victory Challenge at Brands Hatch. We were in buoyant mood when David qualified in 29th place. I woke up on the morning of the race suffering from a stomach upset, so the team went on without me. On the parade lap, turning into Hawthorne's Bend, an ignition cut-off wire dislodged, killing the engine and the Connew Formula One Story with it. To get home through the Dartford Tunnel, Peter, short of cash, wrote a cheque for 12.5p. During that last month there were no wages. We had hoped a decent result would secure a deal with Lec for 1973, but without it I reluctantly left. Within a week I was back behind my desk at the wholesale funeral suppliers. The whole thing was like a dream, until I began ordering coffins again. In 1973, Peter adapted the car to take Swiss driver Pierre Sucre's Formula 5000 engine. He qualified at Mallory Park, but did not start. After failing to qualify at Brands Hatch, Pierre vanished from racing completely. Tony Trimmer drove the car for the last time, again at Brands Hatch. During the race, as he turned into Stirling's Bend, a shock absorber broke, sending the car into the barriers, without injury to the driver. Daddy D collapsed after Tony's crash at Brands Hatch, but recovered completely. George Lake towed the Connew back through the Dartford Tunnel for the 12th and final time. I apologise to anyone I have omitted from my story, including Brands Hatch promoter John Webb, Don Strawn, our accountant, and not forgetting Pinky and Perky, our gophers. Thanks must also go to our many suppliers who donated parts we could not otherwise afford, and to our fan club who loyally cheered us along. Our engine was sold to Tom Wheatcroft and now sits in the McLaren M7C. The gearbox went into Alain de Cadenet's sports car. Tony Trimmer won the 1978 British Formula One Championship, and David Purley won the British Formula 5000 Championship in 1976. Francois Migaud drove for BRM in 1974 and raced sports cars until 2003. Roger Doran recently sold a shop fitting business built up post-Connew. The Connew team was the most exciting thing I have ever had the privilege to be involved with, an unrepeatable experience. I'm still a Formula One fanatic and have retired to Malta. There was little to show for all the effort, hours, love and affection that went into our car, but Peter's target to build a Formula One car and see it compete in a Grand Prix was achieved, if only for 22 glorious laps. Today, a design consultant at Ford, Peter keeps the Connew dream alive. All that is needed to put the old girl back together is a Cosworth DFV and a Hewland DG300 gearbox. If you happen to have either going cheap, please get in touch.